Hello students, welcome to Read Med Prep Academy channel. Today in Sexual Reproduction in Plants part 1, we are going to discuss about the introduction to sexual reproduction in higher plants, introduction to the flower, introduction to the pre-fertilization structures and events, introduction to the fertilization in higher plants, and introduction to the post-fertilization structures and events. Sexual reproduction involves the production and fusion of male and the female gametes. The production of gametes is called gametogenesis. The production of pollen grains in the anther by the sporangia is called microsporogenesis. The formation of the ovule in the ovary in the gynoecium is called the megasporogenesis. Here you can see the formation of the gametes. The male gamete is formed in the anther, which results in the formation of the microspore, and it forms the male gametophyte, which matures into the pollen grains, which is the male gamete, and the gynoecium produces the megaspore in the carpel, and it forms the female gametophyte. And the fusion of the pollen grain and the ovule results in fertilization and forms the endosperm and the seed. The seed further, when planted, germinates into the new plant. The fusion of the male and the female gamete is called fertilization. How this occurs in the higher plants? The pollen grain, which contains the male gamete, falls on the stigma of the flower, and it forms the pollen tube in the style, and it reaches the ovary, and the male gamete fuses with the nuclei of the ovule and forms the embryo sac and the development of the endosperm and the seed. In lower plants like algae and bryophytes, the gametes are motile or non-motile depending on the type of species. Here in this image you can see on the left side the immobile or the non-motile gametes, and on the right side the motile gametes which have the flagella for the motility. The gametic fusion is of three types. Isogamy, in which the gametes are structurally similar and morphologically similar. In anisogamy, the gametes are structurally and morphologically dissimilar. And in oogamy, the one gamete, which is the egg, is immotile or non-motile, and the sperm is motile, and the fusion of the sperm nuclei with the egg nuclei occurs in the gynoecium, resulting in the formation of the zygote. In algae, the fertilization is external. That means it takes outside the plant body. Here in this you can see the multicellular haploid organism or the plant produces the haploid gametes, and the haploid gametes fuse together to form this zygote, which is diploid by fertilization. And the diploid zygote undergoes meiosis and forms large number of spores, which under favorable conditions develop into a new plant. In higher plants, the fertilization is internal. That means it occurs within the plant body. Normally it occurs within the ovary of the gynoecium, where the male nuclei and the female nuclei fuse together in the ovary and forms the endosperm and the seed. Now let us discuss about the flower. A flower is viewed in multidimensional perspectives from time immemorial. It is an inspirational tool for the poets. Here you can see the poets use the flowers as an object for describing nature. Here you can see a small poem written by William Blake. As I wandered the forest, the green leaves among, I heard a wild flower singing a song. Likewise, many poets have written many poems regarding the flowers. It is also a decorative material for all the celebrations and happy occasions. In Tamil literature, the 5 lands are denoted by 5 different flowers. These are called thinais. Here you can see in the center the Kurinji thinai. Outside the Kurinji thinai is the Palai thinai, and outerwards is the Mullai thinai, and outer to the Mullai thinai is the Mardam thinai, and outer to the Mardam thinai is the Neidal thinai. The names of Kurinji, Palai, Mullai, Mardam and Neidal are all the flowers. Flowers are also used in the manufacture of perfumes. For morphologists, the flower is a condensed tip of the shoot, which is responsible for the specialized function of reproduction. Here you can see in this image, the vegetative parts are the leaf, stem and the root, whereas the flowers are the reproductive parts of a plant. Now, what are the different parts of a flower? A flower has 4 whorls. The outermost whorl is the calyx called the sepals, and the inner to the calyx is the corolla called the petals. Inner to the corolla is the androecium, which is the male reproductive part, and inner to the androecium is the gynoecium, which is the female reproductive part. Androecium and gynoecium are the essential organs of sexual reproduction. Here you can see the parts of a flower. The sepals give protection of the flower buds. The petals give the color to the flower, which helps in pollination and attracting the insects. The male reproductive organ of the flower is the stamen, which consists of a filament and the anther. And the female reproductive organ is called the carpel, which has a stigma on which the pollen grains come and stick, and it has a style with the pollen tube, and an ovary which is present on the receptacle with large number of ovules or a single ovule attached to the placenta. What are the stages of reproduction? The process of changes involved in sexual reproduction include 3 stages: the pre-fertilization stages, fertilization stages and post-fertilization stages. Now, what are the pre-fertilization structures? They are the androecium, the male reproductive part, the gynoecium, the female reproductive part. And what is the pre-fertilization event? The most important event in the plant is pollination. Now, the hormonal and structural changes in the plant lead to the differentiation and development of the floral primordium. The male reproductive part consists of the androecium, which is made up of stamens. Stamens are made up of a filament and an anther. The anther has the microspores which mature into the pollen grains. In future classes, we'll be discussing about the development of the male gametophyte. The stamen, which has the anther at its tip, has the pollen grains which act as the male gametophyte or the male gamete or the sperm. And the filament supports the anther. The female reproductive part is the gynoecium. Gynoecium is made up of pistil or carpel. The pistil consists of the stigma, style, ovary containing the ovule. In future classes, we will be discussing about the structure of the ovule or the megasporangium, the types of ovules, the megasporogenesis or the formation of the ovule, and the development of the monosporic embryonic sac. Now, the carpel or the pistil has a stigma in which the pollen grain comes and sticks. The style is a long tube that connects the stigma to the ovary. The ovary is an enlarged structure that is present at the base of the carpel or pistil where the ovules are located, and it becomes the fruit. Ovules contain the female gametophyte and it becomes the seed. Now, what is meant by the pollination, which is an important pre-fertilization event? Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. What is self-pollination or autogamy? Self-pollination is the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same plant. What is cross-pollination? Cross-pollination is the transfer of the pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of the same kind, maybe of the different plant. Now, what are the fertilization events? The pollen-pistil interaction, double fertilization and triple fusion. So, what is fertilization in the higher plants? The pollen grains, when they fall on the stigma, they grow a pollen tube down to the ovule. And one of the pollen tube reaches the ovule where the male nucleus fuses with the nucleus of the female cell. This event is called fertilization. Now, what is this pollen-pistil interaction? When the pollen, by pollination, falls on the stigma, there occurs some reactions by which the pollen grain grows a pollen tube in the style. And one of the pollen tube enters into the embryo sac. Fusion of both the male nuclei occurs, which is called double fertilization. One nuclei fuses with the primary nuclei of the ovule, whereas the other nuclei fuses with the secondary nuclei or the polar nuclei. This event is called double fertilization. Here you can see that one of the male nuclei fuses with the primary nuclei of the ovule and another nuclei fuses with the polar nuclei. The nuclei that fuses with the primary nuclei forms the 2n zygote, whereas the male gamete or the nuclei that fuses with the polar nuclei forms the 3n endosperm. What is triple fusion? Second male gamete fuses with the secondary nucleus to form the primary endosperm nucleus. This is called triple fusion because 3 nuclei are involved in the fusion process. 1 male gamete nuclei and 2 polar nuclei. Now, what are the post-fertilization structures and events? Most important is the formation of the endosperm, and next is the formation of the seed. 3n nuclei formed by the fusion of the second male gamete and the 2 polar bodies or the secondary nuclei develop to form the endosperm. The zygote or the 2n nuclei is formed by the fusion of the first male gamete and the primary nuclei, which forms the seed. Here you can see in the image below the formation of the 2n nuclei, the zygote, and the formation of the 3n endosperm. How the seed formation occurs? The zygote that is formed by the fusion of the primary nuclei and the male gamete undergoes repeated mitosis to form an embryo. An embryo consists of a plumule, the future shoot, a radicle, the future root, and cotyledons, food stores needed for germination. Here you can see in this image on the left side the monocot seed. An example is the corn. It has a single cotyledon containing the endosperm. That is why it is called the monocot, and it has a seed coat around the endosperm. It has an embryo that develops into a new plant. On the right side you can see a dicot seed, which is a bean seed, which has 2 cotyledons. That is why it is called dicot. It has an outer seed coat consisting of the tesma and the tegmen, and inside is the plumule, epicotyle, hypocotyle, and the radicle. Today, in Sexual Reproduction in Plants Part 1, we discussed the basic introduction of sexual reproduction, about the flower, about the pre-fertilization structures and events like the Androecium, Gynoecium, and the pollination, and the fertilization in higher plants, and the post-fertilization structures and events like the endosperm and the seed formation. Thank you. Kindly subscribe, like, share, and comment the channel Read MedPrep Academy. Log on to www.readmedprepacademy.com. Our Facebook ID is Read MedPrep Academy. Our email is readmedprepacademy@gmail.com. Kindly post your questions in the comment box. We will reply with appropriate answers. Thank you very much.